Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. This is our fifth presentation in a series of 8 sessions on the biblical roots of American civilization. Tonight we want to talk about the topic of justice and the role of the state. Now, when we talk about the state, we're delving into politics. And the discipline of politics deals with the issue of sovereignty. Who has sovereignty over whom? And what is the justification for exercising that sovereignty? And what is the purpose for which the sovereignty is exercised? Now, there are questions about whether or not sovereignty should be limited, and that's what we're going to touch on first. The ancient pagan notion of sovereignty was not one of limited sovereignty, and this is the difference that we're going to go into between the pagan notion and Judeo-Christian notions. One of the fundamental differences. In the pagan notion, the sovereign was divine, was God on earth. One of the examples was the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was a god. And you don't limit the god's sovereignty. It's as simple as that. The sovereign has absolute unlimited right to rule. And there is no question in that, and there's no limiting that sovereignty. And actually, the the unlimited right to sovereignty and the totality of that sovereignty and unlimitedness was used throughout human history to justify the institution of slavery. It was one of the big reasons through which slavery was justified, and slavery has been present in every human society since the beginning of mankind. And it wasn't until the Judeo-Christian notion of limited sovereignty was brought about that eventually, in principle, led to the abolition of slavery. So you have this notion that the sovereign is God, and so therefore the sovereign's authority is not limited. This leads to the concept of unlimited authority for the state, or an unlimited state. On the other hand, in the Judeo-Christian notion, you have the human sovereign is a limited temporal being created by God. The only true sovereign is God, who is transcendent. So sovereignty comes from a transcendent moral source of authority, which is God. That brings up a question, a tension: to what extent can human beings exercise sovereignty? And this is an issue that's brought up by this concept in the Genesis, and we've talked about this in other issues. There's an account where God blesses mankind to be fruitful, to multiply, and have dominion. And the dominion is talking about exercising dominion over creation. So at least in respect to the creation, God has taken a piece of his sovereignty and given it to man because he created man in his own image. It's not that man has the sovereignty in his own right. It's God shares some of that sovereignty as a blessing to man to exercise dominion over creation. So the sovereignty, although man does not have by virtue of his nature the authority and the right to exercise sovereignty, it is given to him as a blessing. So that is the biblically based view, based upon the Genesis account of the 3 blessings. Now the question is so man is given sovereignty over creation, but that still leads to the issue of the sovereignty of man versus man. And this has been a question and has been argued about. And in pagan thought, even the most enlightened pagans, this is not, there's no issue here. Aristotle, who was considered the most enlightened, one of the most enlightened of the pagans, and one of the figures that a lot of our founders and even some Christians look to for guidance on certain issues. On some issues, they obviously had to reject his views, because Aristotle was quoted as saying that there's some people who are born to rule, and there are some people who are born to be ruled. Quite simple. No problem. Some people are born to rule. Some people are born to be ruled, and that's all there is to it. It was this, and that's, again, was used to justify the institution of slavery. Some people are born to rule, and some people are born to be ruled. There's nothing strange about it. It's natural. Well, Augustine had responded to this and was referring to the Genesis account of God giving man dominion. And he said that God gave man dominion over creation, rational being over irrational nature. God did not give man dominion over man, the rational being over other rational beings. So he was referring to the institution of slavery when he said this. And this was actually the justification that was used during the Middle Ages for the abolition of slavery in Europe at the time when the Catholic Church had held sway there. But so he's talking about slavery, but this is an issue that is brought up time and time again throughout Christian history when the issue of the government, the political authority or sovereign authority of man over man comes up. By what justification does one set of men rule another? And there are certain schools of thought within Christianity that there is no justification for that. And there's someone saying, so that is an issue. Another question at issue here is, what is the purpose for which a sovereignty is exercised? Now, in much of pagan tradition, sovereignty is exercised simply to express the will of the sovereign. It's easy. I said it, I willed it, so be it. What is in the movie The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, where he plays Moses, so it was said, so it be done. The Pharaoh used to have this saying, I can't remember exactly, so it was said, so it shall be done. In other words, I said it, let it be done. There is no questioning of his will, simply because he willed it. And so the exercise of sovereignty and the state apparatus, the purpose of the state apparatus was to assert the will of the sovereign. And the Judeo-Christian view is a lot different. There's a difference. And actually, to a certain extent, you find this in the Greek philosophical tradition as well. But it's more prominent in the Judeo-Christian view. I'm going to go into both briefly. The purpose for which sovereignty is exercised is the realization of justice. It isn't simply the assertion of will. And the most drastic example of this difference is in the account where God had called the Israelites out of Egypt, and they're going through the desert, and they're heading on their way to Canaan. And God asked Moses to go up to the mountaintop to receive the Ten Commandments. And so Moses is traveling up to the mountaintop, Mount Sinai, and he's getting ready to receive the Ten Commandments. In the meantime, the Israelites are engaging in all types of atrocity, and golden calf and fornication and things that really God was rather unpleased with, to say the least. And so he says to Moses, and he's not in a very good mood. He's saying, I'm going to destroy, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm going to destroy these people. They're doing all this kind of terrible things, and I'm just going to destroy them. And Moses, if a pagan god would have said that to his follower, oh yes, sir, whatever you say, you don't question the will of the sovereign. But Moses said what will the Egyptians think of you if you do this? They will think you're not a very powerful God. And then, so God's response is interesting. He repented of what he was thinking of doing to his people. Now, you're not going to find something like this in many religious traditions, particularly, the ultimate sovereign, the ruler of the universe, repenting in what he was thinking of doing to his people. Now, so this makes it really clear that it's not just the assertion of will that he's concerned with, it's the establishment of justice. And so he was a little bit ticked off. Personally, I'm looking at this and you're thinking, well, what is being said here? Is there a deeper message? Is God really that fickle?